very good evening to everyone, and we are going to be beginning with the closing plenary today, and it's going to be a very interesting session because we have a very distinguished person with us over here today, and I'm very honored to be able to introduce him to all of you. We have with us today Mr. Pramath Sinha. Mr. Sinha is the co-founder and dean of the Young India Fellowship. He also led a group of philanthropists to create the Ashoka University. I'm sure most of us have heard of the Ashoka University, a world-class liberal arts university in India that is already making waves. Passionate about media, Mr. Sinha is the managing director and co-founder of 9.9 Media, a diversified media company. Prior to this, he spent nearly 13 years with McKinsey & Company and also led the ABP Group. The author of the book An Idea Whose Time Has Come, Mr. Sinha has also helped set up and served as the dean of the widely recognized Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. Mr. Sinha loves hiking, and his expertise in media and operations strategy is unparalleled. So today we have Mr. Sinha with us as a speaker of our closing plenary, and I'd be very delighted to invite you over here, sir, and share with us your thoughts and your personal journey. Thank you.
Good evening, and really thank you for having me here. As all of you know, I'm a substitute. If you look at the calendar for the agenda, poor Dwight Jaggard, who was supposed to be here, fell down while he was running, and I had to step in. So I hope I am a worthy substitute, and it's truly not the beginning of the end of this conference. I'd like to focus on the four themes of TGELF: leadership, altruism, ethics, and decisive action. I don't know if they are in a particular order. I have to tell you that whenever I'm introduced these days, despite everything else I've done, and the elocution contests that I won when Mrs. Ishwaran was my English teacher, which I'm really proud of, you don't believe this? There's nepotism going on here. Right? As far as I'm concerned, I still feel like I'm on test, you know. The fact is, you add everything I've done in my life up, and whenever I'm introduced, I will always be introduced as founding dean of ISB. What most people don't realize is that actually I was involved in ISB for 15 years, and I'm still very involved. But what they remember is the fact that I was the first dean. Now that has something to do with titles, but my point was slightly different. And the point is that ultimately people measure you by what you achieved. And this perhaps gets away from some of those nice attributes that we all talked about being fair and ethical and visionary and motivational and being a servant leader and so on. But you know what? I've found the world to be a tough place. And ultimately, people first and foremost want to see whether you achieved something or not. And it doesn't, I'll come to whether it has to be big or not, and we'll address that issue. But the fact is that most of you are going to end up doing really well, and getting introduced the way I was, that, you know, I've created a university and I've built this business school and I was at McKinsey and so on, right? And these are all wonderful credentials that really sound impressive. I get impressed when I hear them as well, and I'm sure my mother would be even more impressed. But the fact is that that is what people look at. However much we say, please look at whether this is a fair guy or not. Please look at whether this guy made a difference to somebody's life or not. And that's one of the realities that I have found. Nobody talks about the moments where I really helped somebody, or I was fair, or I was passionate, or I was visionary. So I'm not trying to deflate a balloon here. I only want you to be practical about the way in which you are going to be viewed by the world as you go out there, that ultimately people want you to make a difference, and the bigger difference you make, the bigger leader you are considered to be. And I think it's a bit unfortunate, frankly. And I'm not suggesting that we always look for the big things to do. I will talk about what else you need to do, or at least what I believe you need to do. But I think that's the reality that I've always faced in my life. And I'm a little disappointed with the world. But much as I try, that's how the world looks at you. And I just wanted to share that with you. So while it's not only about money, power, titles, thankfully, it is about what kind of impact you had. And I think somewhere this whole notion of decisive action is probably where this thought gets captured in the way T-Gelf is set up, in that it's not just about altruism, it's not just about ethics, it's also about making something happen. And I think that's an important aspect of the whole program that I think resonates with me as well. But I want to move to something else, which is what you all talked about. And it's interesting because all of you referred to these wonderful, wonderful attributes that we all must have as a human being. I would advocate that you need to do all of those things to be a good human being, not just to be a leader. And I think somewhere, somehow, we have started to overemphasize that leadership is something really big. And it is bigger than us. And that it's beyond us. We have to go out and change the world. We love to celebrate these amazing things that people have done. Built a business school, set up a university, right? And then what seems to happen is that it seems like those are the only things that are worth celebrating. Those are the only things that are worth highlighting. And then it becomes that leadership is really about those things. So what I'd like to focus on is there are hundreds of moments in our lives that actually are small leadership moments. I don't know if any of you have seen this TED Talk by a guy called Drew Dudley. Have you seen the Drew Dudley TED Talk? Anybody? So he talks about lollipop moments. So he says leadership is really about a series of lollipop moments in your life, right? Nice, you've seen that? Yeah. And he says that it's really about, when you talk about compassion and when you talk about altruism and when you talk about ethics and when you talk about being good and doing the right thing, it's not about building this big thing and we're going out and changing the world. It's like about being that way every day, in every interaction, in whatever you do. And somewhere we have to also celebrate that kind of leadership. So I remember a day, and I remember it very clearly even today. This is the year 1978. And I'm in grade 9 in a school called St. Michael's, Patna. And I get a new English teacher. And this English teacher has come in at a time when our annual elocutions are supposed to be held. And I'm a very proud elocutionist. I always win gold medals. And I'm really proud because I know how to win gold medals. I pick a great speech and I memorize the hell out of it and I deliver it flawlessly. You ask me to do an impromptu speech, I am shit scared. And I always pick the winning speeches. Winston Churchill, Jawaharlal Nehru, So half the battle is won there only, right? Because, somebody announces this Jawaharlal Nehru speech, tryst with destiny, gold medal halfway there. So I get chosen from my class, and that year I did choose the tryst with destiny speech delivered at Independence Day, 1947, and I did win the gold medal. And I was chosen to go and represent the school in a inter-Jesuit schools competition. So it's an inter-school competition in the east of India, where people like Suhail Seth and Barry and Derek O'Brien, some of you may have heard of them, were all my competitors. It was very intimidating for me to go from a small school in Patna to meet these guys and debate with them and participate in competition with them. And this English teacher tells me, I don't think you should do this Jawaharlal Nehru speech. And I'm stunned, this is easy. I've got it. It's done, right? And she picks a drama, and from that drama, she picks a passage which has multiple pieces to it. And it doesn't lend itself to an elocution at all. And of course, this teacher is sitting here and you know who it is, but the point is that I was like, this is absolutely the wrong thing to do, but how do I say no to my teacher who's also actually a friend of my mother's? So it makes it even more complicated. So this is a speech from, I'm blanking out, Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. And it's a very difficult speech, but she says, if you really want to win this, you have to pick something that is distinctive. And that's when you will stand out. And believe me, you can do a great job of this speech. And she spends hours and days coaching me and teaching me, because obviously I'm very nervous. This is the first time I'm taking on something which is not popular and well known. Needless to say, not to belabor the story, I think I went on, I didn't win the gold medal. I actually won the silver. But I have to tell you that I still have that medal framed and at home in a little frame. And the reason I have that is that that day I realized that, doing the easy stuff is just easy. And if you really want to stretch yourself, and so when people say risk-taking, how do you learn risk-taking? It's when somebody really pushes you, holds your hand, literally pulls you up with the rope over the wall and says, you take that risk, I'll be there to support you. Today, when I write something, when I speak somewhere, when I have to put a document together, I'm always asking myself, does this have the Murder in the Cathedral element in this? That's a lollipop moment. That's a leadership moment that changes you forever. Those are the moments that leadership is made of. Thank you. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Just had to. A second story. So I was a hotshot consultant at McKinsey, had been there for 3 years. I was one of the few people McKinsey hired with a PhD in robotics. And I used to be called a rocket scientist. Most people joke about rocket scientists. Because I used to work on the space shuttle arm. Some of you may have seen the arm that puts satellites in orbits. And I used to work on research projects that actually created the space shuttle arm. So when I joined McKinsey, it was like, oh, we've hired a rocket scientist. And so they would give me all these complicated models to build. And in those days, Excel was still a very crude thing. So I was in one of my assignments asked to model the television industry in Canada. And essentially, I created this humongous model which was 1 megabyte big. I was very proud of the fact that it was 1 megabyte. Which you could change the viewer ratings of a show that was being shown in Calgary, and the valuation of the company would change, and it will tell you what the share price would be. It was ridiculous, but I was very proud of it. And so we used this model, and our team loved it because it was such a wonderful thing, and they could run different scenarios, and they could model what would happen if this television station did that, and if we changed the soap opera from the 6 p.m. slot to the 3 p.m. slot. And people had fun with it. In fact, our clients loved it, and they said, wow, can we have this model? Because we'd like to keep this model and use it for our decision making going forward. And I was very proud that I had made such an impact, and I was going to get my promotion and my big bonus that year, and I was already seeing a nice vacation and so on. Of course, when the client said that the model had to be handed over, my superiors very proudly said, of course, but they knew nothing about the model. And I was left to now create the model in a way that it could be handed over for somebody else to run, because it was, of course, quite clear to me, but how do you create something that other people can do? As I was cleaning the model up one night, I discovered that except in clicking on one cell, I'd actually clicked on the blank cell next to that cell. And so the value that was going into a formula was 0 when it should have been a number. And that mistake was a fairly costly mistake. Those of you who are slightly older and have done valuation models will know that the weighted average cost of capital is extremely sensitive to the value that you create. And this was a formula about the weighted average cost of capital. And so I thought in one fell swoop that I had lost my job, my career, and I was going to be fired the next day. So I couldn't sleep all night. I went and told my wife that I have screwed up big time and you should know that I'm going to be without a job tomorrow. And, this is the big bad world of investment banking, consulting, corporate America, and, how could you make such a big, humongous mistake? 6 months of work, all lost because you clicked on the wrong cell. Next morning, I met with my manager and I had breakfast with her and I told her what I had discovered. She was also somebody who had just been designated manager, and I still remember the look on her face. She was in shock. And this is such a big letdown. This guy who we all thought was a rocket scientist, he clicked on the wrong cell and didn't know that I could see all of that in the look. And poor woman, she was just also as scared as I was about what was going to happen. And then the partner, who was this big, famous guy from our New York office, expert in media, guy who had all the client relationships, was going to come down at 12 o'clock and we were going to take the model and go to the client. And I was really, pardon the expression, but I was shitting bricks. I was like, this is... So I walk into the room to see Tom Eisenman, head of the media practice, big, imposing. He used to be a defensive back in college, so he was a big guy, 6 foot, but big, wearing his horn-rimmed glasses. And he looks at me, and he puts his arm around my shoulders. And he says, "You must be feeling pretty shitty right now, right?" And in that one moment, everything changed. I still get goosebumps when I tell this story. That was a moment that changed me forever. It changed me as a leader. It changed the empathy I feel towards people who work for me. It changed the way I react to people when they screw up, when they've obviously screwed up, like this morning when a person I've just hired was supposed to come for a meeting at 9:30 and actually showed up at 10:15 and had obviously overslept. It changes you. It changes you completely. It makes a difference to your life forever. That's just another lollipop moment. So when you talk about altruism, when you talk about ethics and you talk about empathy, where it really comes down to is not the big decision about whether you're going to donate all your wealth to the poor who live in the slums of Delhi, or that you are going to be not running a business that is going to pay bribes to the government to get licenses. It's really about these small moments where you actually make a huge difference to people who come and work with you on a daily basis. On altruism, I have one last story, and I think this is probably the one that has the most relevance, and then I will stop because it's easy to tell stories and one can get caught up in your own stories. I would like to then stop and maybe open it up for questions. So why do people follow you? Somebody said that people look up to you, and I was trying to explore that. When do people really follow you? When do people really follow you? When do you want to really follow people? Why do you trust them? That's a good word, by the way. So you must have heard this word many, many times in many, many sessions. Why do you trust somebody? Sorry? So when they inspire you, yes. Who do you trust the most in your life? Sorry? Ones who earn it, but in your life right now, who do you trust the most? Your mother. Why do you trust your mother the most? They deliver, yes, but we don't really look at decisive action from your moms, right? Unconditional. What does this unconditional really mean? Why is some friend or relative or boss or where does this unconditionality even fail with friends? When are friends sometimes not unconditional? When they have their own intent. So what is it about the mom? In our day-to-day lives, and particularly in our work, being selfless, truly selfless, is the most difficult thing to do. And to actually act truly in the interest of other people. And I have found that it is very easy to follow people, to trust people, when you know that they are not being selfish. When vis-a-vis you, forget about the rest of the world for a minute, but vis-a-vis you, they are being truly selfless. And they will go out of their way to make you successful. Now, I'm talking now purely about work and projects and the kind of careers and so on that we all are part of. Whether it is in a corporate world, whether it is in the NGO, whether you are in a business, whether you are in the government, whether you are an academic. And I used to be an academic for a couple of years as well, so I know that world can't be always very selfless. It's quite tough, in fact. But the fact is that the reason people follow you, or when you follow people, the one ingredient that makes the biggest difference is the ingredient that your mom has. And that is selflessness, and that is the most difficult thing to practice, actually. It's very easy to recognize, it's very easy to fall for, but it's just very, very difficult to practice. I'll give you a quick example. And this is unfortunately, this is a story that has a completely different side to it, because this person is actually in jail right now. And he is the person that I see as my biggest mentor, and the person that I have been the biggest follower of. And I'm quite open about saying that. I have supported him personally throughout this process of being incarcerated that he's going through. I'm actually going to visit him in jail in 4 weeks. But this is a person who taught me this. So this is Rajat Gupta, who was the managing director of McKinsey at that time. And I was involved in the ISB project. I was, by the way, never supposed to be dean. A bit like today, I was the substitute. So what happened was that we had recruited the dean of the ISB. In fact, we had not recruited one but two deans. We had recruited Sumantra Ghoshal, who was a very famous management academic. And we had recruited Deepak Jain, who went on to be the dean of Kellogg and INSEAD. Now, Sumantra somewhere got cold feet, and he said, listen, I'm an academic and a researcher. I don't want to do this. So he withdrew, and we said, okay, fine, let him go. We have Deepak. And then a month before the school starts, Deepak gets designated dean of Kellogg. And Shiv and Uday and their dad have been very involved in the school, so you'll remember this story. And we were in panic mode. Now, what do you do? And in fact, Sumantra and Deepak had actually gone out, just as I've gone out, and Uttara is here somewhere, and some of our other Ashoka University prospects are here, where we went out and actually sold the whole idea of the ISB through these two guys. And then people resigned from their jobs to join ISB because they said, We are going to teach you. And then they both decamped. So the board asked me if I would become the dean. And that meant leaving McKinsey, even if it was for 1 year, moving to Hyderabad, living there, which I had never done. I had been very involved, but I had clients in Hyderabad and I used to work with them. So I said, okay, maybe I'll just do it. And I was very enthusiastic. But I encountered a very unusual resistance, which was from my wife, who is also called Gauri, by the way, so that influence continues. And she says, over my dead body, we are not moving out of Hyderabad, out of Delhi. I'm not moving to Hyderabad. We've just settled down here and you're not going anywhere. And by the way, you are not giving up your McKinsey job. Your partners will never allow you to come back. So I get this very strong resistance from my wife, who's always been very supportive, and I don't know what to do. So I go to Rajat and I say, Rajat, it's very kind that the board wants me to be dean, but I'm afraid Gauri will not agree. And he says, why don't I talk to her? Now that is a big problem because Gauri is a very outspoken and a very direct person, and I can't trust her for what she will say to Rajat. So I tried to hum and haw through it, but he says, no, I'll come, don't worry. So he shows up for lunch, and my deal with my wife is that the conversation about the deanship won't start till after lunch. So Rajat walks in and she says, why don't you get him a drink? And I ask him what he wants. I go to get the juice, and by the time I'm back, the conversation is about me being dean of ISB. And so there's this big debate going on in the room, and then suddenly she turns to him, and as I had expected, she says, Rajat, if this is such a great opportunity for Pramath, why don't you do it? And I'm like, my God, I mean, this is after all the managing director of my firm globally. I'm just a piddly partner in India. And, how could she say this? And, there was a silence in the room, and I wasn't sure how he would react. And then a minute later, he says, because he will do a much better job of this than I will. This is a simple statement, and some of you might think that this is corny and cute, and of course, But in that moment, in that sentence, and in the way it was said and how it was said, it just brought home all of what you would see in a coach or a mentor or somebody who's really looking out for you. A year later, when I was actually leaving ISB and having learned from him, the board was offering me the position to stay on, and I said, no, this is a position meant for an academic, and I shouldn't do this. I wanted to leave, and he took me aside and he said, you've done so much for the school. I'm worried that you will leave and people will forget what you've done. And I said, but you've taught me that it doesn't matter. The school is there. It'll speak for itself. Why should I care? He said, no, I want to do something about this. I'm not happy about the fact that you've done so much, and tomorrow there's a new dean who's going to come and all your contributions are going to be forgotten. I said, don't worry about it, Rajat. The next board meeting, I'm part of the meeting, and suddenly this discussion happens, and Rajat brings up this thing that, I think the board should recognize the contribution that Pramath has made and designate him a founding dean who can continue with this title, because this will allow us to access him for the rest of his life without us feeling we are imposing on him. I was completely stunned. And for a minute I thought, maybe he is just being emotional, and maybe I am his favorite, and maybe this is a little bit of a weakness that you see in a leader. But you know what? If I can step back from it objectively, I can truly tell you that it did make a difference, because I was able to stay on, and I have been able to continue and contribute to the school in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't have that access or that little title which comes with leadership sometimes being associated with the title and people wanting to look at you that way. So I've been very fortunate and privileged that regardless of all the gyan that I have read about leadership in the books and the TED Talks and the wonderful speeches and the workshops I've attended in my life, ultimately I think lollipop moments have made it for me. I hope that you all have lots of lollipop moments in your lives as well. I hope that you've had some in the last 2 days. But more importantly, your real test of leadership will be, can you create lollipop moments for others? And I hope that you will be inspired enough to do that as you go out into the real world. I'll stop here and open it up for questions. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Everybody is so stunned by my delivery that. No, thank you.
I think one thing that definitely comes across from your entire career is that you've been an institution builder, something which is quite rare. So what do you think is that one quality or something that is really key to really being able to leave behind, be it institutions or things that can carry on and have a larger legacy and goes beyond the individual? So if you could just answer.
So I think you answered your question. I think the key is that an institution cannot be about an individual. Unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of people who get into building institutions want to do it because they want the recognition that comes from building that institution. And those two things are not compatible. So we are very proud of the fact that Ashoka University doesn't have a founder named Ashoka. And I'm glad that T-Gulf is not called the Shiv Khemka, whatever, leadership forum, right? Because the point is, too many people are building institutions where it is about them and not the institution. I think that's the fundamental thing that you have to make a difference. Equally, I think it's important that institutions are owned by lots of people. The more distributed, collective model of ownership that you have, the easier it is for it to not become dominated by one or two individuals or their thinking only. Yet, everybody who is involved thinks it's their institution. So you need to have both. You need to have multiple owners so that no one person owns it, but then every one of those people should feel like they are the only owner and they have so much vested in it. Now this is tough to do. It's very difficult to do. Again, not to make this only about Rajat, when we set up ISB, he had recognized this, and so he said, if we are going to take money from people to build this institution, and different people are going to give different amounts of money, we are always going to get into a problem where somebody is going to say, wow, this is great, I'll give you 300 crores. Why don't we call it the Bill Gates School of Business? And will we do that? And our belief always was that anyone who gives money will get one vote, doesn't matter. And if he wants to give more money, we'll name a building after them, and we'll name a tree after them, and we'll name the whole campus after them. But ultimately, the institution will be an independent institution which doesn't have anybody's name on it, and yet everybody is recognized for contributing to that institution. So even at Ashoka, when we set it up in this way, where for day one, in fact, we had an offer literally. So far we've collected 200 crores for Ashoka, and we got a request from one of India's foremost business people, who's very good, by the way, excellent person. And he said, I'll give you 300 crores, and that'll cover all your funding, but I want 5 people on your board, and I want this, and I want that, and we had to say no. Because you can't build an institution for the future like that. There was a John Harvard, but he never really ran Harvard University. There was a Leland Stanford, but the Stanford family never really ran Stanford University. And the great models of philanthropy and institution building are really about that. I mean, if you look at the Tata Institutes in India, for them to have created these and handed them over to the government and the state that some of them are in right now, is sad, but those are truly independent institutions. So this is tough to do, and a great question, but this is where true selflessness comes in, if you ask me. But you do need people to make sure that others understand this. It's difficult to explain to people, because when people are contributing time or money, and it's not just about money, even if they are giving their effort, they want extra recognition for that. That's again our human tendency. Yeah?
So just to follow up on this question, as leaders, we have been assigned into various groups, and we're trying to working on action groups and action projects within our own TGAL family. So something that we've all been trying to do is that although it's a collective project, how do you give that focused direction to it? So you just spoke about that it needs to be collective ownership and everyone does it together. But how do we actually go about having that kind of collective responsibility which is equally focused and is giving tremendous results as one person's energy could maybe possibly give?
Yeah. So I do think that the point about focus is a good one, and I mean, these are already great questions. Obviously, you are actually dealing with these questions, which is why you are asking these questions, and people wouldn't ask these as theoretical questions. I do think that even with that collective model, one or two people have to take the lead. And it doesn't mean that there is no hierarchy in the team. The truth is that on all these projects, one or two people that have really gone out and been in front. Now, these are people that others have to trust to allow them to take the decisions, to provide the focus, or to marshal the group in a particular direction. So it can't be led by 30 people. In fact, you need one person who is in charge. And that person then has to be somebody who can build the trust of everybody, who can make sure that they all feel included, right? And make the extra effort to include people who are getting excluded. I mean, I can tell you that the ugly side of this is that there are huge egos that you have to manage. So I can tell you right now I'm dealing with a situation where by mistake in a board meeting we discussed that one of our donors is going to be on one committee, and when the list of that committee came out, his name was not on it, and it has created a massive furor, right? And we are going to have to manage that, and we are asking somebody on that committee to step down and have this person join back that committee and take care of all that. So you have to do all that. Just today, one of my board members has written a nasty letter to me saying, this is the problem with Ashoka, you've hired these leftist faculty, because one of our faculty members, who's a distinguished English professor, and some of you may have read her article in The Hindu, who justifies the wearing of burqas in France, is being accused of being a leftist. Now, you have to handle those situations, and it's tough. And I have to make sure that he is pacified and he understands that, she is not a leftist if she just wrote an article about her position on the judgment that happened in Europe. So there's a whole dark side to this that you also have to manage. But I think those difficulties you can often manage because there's a larger cause. So as long as you're focused on the larger cause, that it's really about that cause that you're working on it, then you can kind of pacify people and keep them happy. Yeah.
What do you think it means for your role as a leader if you do slip up, and do you think that you can go on the straight and narrow through an entire lifetime in a professional career, perhaps in the corporate world?
There are times when you will, and I just gave you an example which of somebody I'm very close to, who followed the straight and narrow and is now in jail. I mean, oftentimes, what is happening in today's world is that you are not even in an ethical trade-off situation. You don't even recognize that you are in such a situation. That's what I meant. And you suddenly get caught in that situation. I'll give you a quick example. A very senior government official in Haryana, and we have to take permission from them for setting up a university. He finds out that I'm in the US. He's called me for asking about something and setting up a meeting. He finds out I'm in the US. Hey, he says, I've been wanting to get this camera. Can you pick this up, please? So I assumed that because I'm in the US, often people ask you to pick up something and it's the latest Canon, whatever. So I pick it up. Very innocently, I come down and of course I just give it to him. And I haven't been paid for that camera. Now, what should I do? And this is a person who is responsible for all our approvals, clearances, right? And should I just treat it as a Diwali gift? I can tell you that we have not so far, and the reason it took us 7 years to get approvals from Haryana government, and which I'm very, very proud of as a group that we did, was because we were not willing to pay money. There are universities that have been created in less time than we took. Because I know, and I know what the going rate is, and I can tell you how much you pay the minister, and how much you pay the secretary, and how much you pay the local tehsildar who has to do so it's all fixed. But we never had to do that, and I have to give credit to the Chief Minister that he supported us all the way, and we never paid a single naya paisa. But yes, this was a situation where you could say that I never intended to give a bribe or a camera to somebody, but I got caught in this situation. Now, should I make a hue and cry about it? Should I go and complain to somebody or complain to him? Some people say, well, why don't you just go tell him, hey, you owe me for this camera. Something holds me back, and I'm willing to admit it in front of this large group that I don't have the courage to do this. So yes, I think you will all draw your line where you feel, and that's the danger in all this, by the way, that sometimes you can draw the line too close to where it is comfortable. The only thing I will caution you is that when in such situations, if you can at least anticipate these situations, talk to other people. Because most times what happens is you don't know what risks you are facing because you are so deeply involved in that situation. And one thing that I was taught at McKinsey, which has helped me a lot, and I wish Rajat had paid attention to this, is that don't associate with people or situations where there is even a perception of impropriety. So don't get into, all of us in this whole goody-goody talk about leadership, right? Get into this, give people benefit of the doubt. If he's being good to me, why should I be enemies with him? Let other people be enemies. I have learned the hard way by now that that doesn't work. So if there's a perception of impropriety around some situation or around somebody, I think it's best to avoid those situations. And it's sad, but I have found now repeatedly in my experience that the perception of impropriety should be strong enough to turn you off and not get close to that situation. So I don't think I'm answering your question directly, but my sense is that try to be as straight and narrow as you can, but don't imagine a utopian world, because many times you will be stuck in situations where you don't even think about it. And you are suddenly realize that, oops, this is actually not straight and narrow anymore. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
On behalf of TGALF and everyone over here, I'd like to thank Mr. Sinha for sharing his story, his ideas, and his thoughts with us. I'm sure we've got a lot to ponder over. I'd also like to request you, sir, to accept a token of our appreciation on behalf of TGALF.
TGALF, leading the change.